Update 4.10 is out and it's brought us a new batch of weapons and refines to talk about. It's good to be back in the land of Fae, and today we'll be discussing Effie, Rhajat, Sigurd / Seliph, and then Arvis / Saias. It looks a bit crowded here, but Seliph is here again because he can use Sigurd's divine Tyrfing, and Arvis and Saias will be sharing the same refine for their respective tomes. We'll be talking about builds and playstyle for each of these units. First up is Effie, who got her own unique lance. It has 16 might, and at the start of combat, if Effie has more than 50% HP, she gets plus 6 attack during combat. Pretty basic effect. Effie already has high base attack, so she's going to continue to hit hard. For the special refined upgrade, during Effie's first combat in player phase or enemy phase, she inflicts -5 attack and defense on the foe and neutralizes their attack and defense field buffs. So basically this is the same as low attack and defense with a bit more punch. That's going to mean Effie hits harder and enemies can't hide behind their defense buffs either. She'll also take less counterattack damage, which is nice because while Effie has high HP and high attack, she's very slow and her defense and res isn't super high for an army unit. The downside of this refine is that it only works one time throughout a phase, so if Effie gets attacked multiple times on the same enemy phase, this ability won't continuously activate. Now this type of condition isn't too detrimental for short battles like Arena, but for longer fights or PvE maps with lots of reinforcements, this weapon isn't going to fare as well. Effie also needs to stay above 50% HP to keep her plus 6 attack boost, so if things get dicey where she ends up surrounded or falls to low HP, then this weapon can actually just revert back into a silver lance. Effie wants to have more controlled engagements where she can fight one enemy at a time, so if you want her to tank every enemy at once, then this lance may not be ideal. In an ideal scenario, a neutral 5-star Effie will sit at 56 attack with this lance equipped, and she's going to get plus 6 attack and inflict -5 defense, so that's like another plus 11 attack or 67 attack total. With no other skills involved, that's kind of scary, and you probably want to lean into that really high attack for a build. While follow-up attacks are always incredibly useful, Effie could go for a one-shot playstyle. With Special Fighter, if she gets hit, she can retaliate with a Glimmer or Moonbow special, and if she has Distant Counter, then she is going to explode any squishy range unit who tries to initiate on her. With plus 10 merges, a plus attack boon, and some attack buffs, you do not want to let her touch you. You can take an attack increase in Sacred Seal like Fierce Stance or Attack and Defense Bond, and to improve Effie's player phase, she would make really good use of Threat Attack and Defense 3. Now, this skill is not easy to get, but if you try to bait Effie and this Threaten procs, that inflicts another -5 defense and gives her plus 5 attack, so that's 10 additional damage overall. While not as ideal, we did just get access to Threat Attack and Defense 2 from Patrine. Now if you want to play more defensive, then you can just stack all the defense and res because Effie's lance is providing a lot of extra attack and inflicts a -5 attack debuff, which is pretty nice. Fortress defense and res, close defense, or one of the tier 3 dual stance skills would be great additions, and Effie could use the new Crafty Fighter B skill, which provides guard and a follow-up attack. While a super tanking build is fine, just remember that refined effect of the lance is not going to work if you send Effie to fight more than one enemy at a time. As for other Armored Fighter B skills, this lance seems like it was designed with Wary Fighter in mind. I don't know if that's the best option anymore because while Effie can survive, she may lose her extra attack boosts. You may just want a more deadly option like Venture or Bold Fighter with their extra special cooldown and follow-up attacks. On the new Halloween banner, we have Slick Fighter, which has quick riposte and neutralizes penalties on Effie. Not a terrible option if you're worried Effie's going to be targeted by chill attack debuffs. Overall, Effie's new lance can provide a lot of damage, but it has a couple of conditions you need to keep track of. The HP condition may be an issue since Effie isn't the most defensive army unit ever, and she's not going to get her refined effect if you fight a mob of enemies. I feel like army units should excel at fighting multiple enemies, but that condition is a strange one. I think this is an okay weapon if you like the high attack, I'm going to nuke anything squishy approach, but it may not be as optimal for a more defensive or scrappy build. Next we have Rhajat, who has spooked me one too many times while chasing a green unit. She got a unique tome called the Obsessive Curse, and well, it may make me rethink foddering her off. Obsessive Curse is a 14-might tome that is effective against cavalry, and it inflicts -5 speed and res on foes within 2 spaces during combat. So Rhajat continues the Tharja family line of AoE debuffs, and this is a solid base effect since Rhajat has decent attack and speed stats. This will help her damage output pretty nicely. Now for the special upgrade after combat, if Rhajat attacked, she deals 7 damage to the target and allies within 2 spaces of target, and she inflicts a status that prevents those foes from counterattacking through their next actions. This is an interesting refine because it's essentially Kemp's Vintage Edge sword. Rhajat will deal AoE damage and she prevents foes from attacking back, which makes her a nice enabler for her team. If her allies can follow up, they will be protected from counterattacks, and with certain builds, Rhajat can cripple those enemies beforehand. This ability combined with a simple speed and res in combat debuff plus cavalry effectiveness is a pretty good package. We're not breaking the game here, but it offers some uniqueness since Rhajat is a mage compared to a melee cavalier. For builds, Rhajat can still stay as a typical fast magic damage dealer. She doesn't have very high HP, defense, or res, so keeping her safe will be important if you want to apply her weapon's ability. Like Kemp or Jafar, Obsessive Curse lends itself to a double Savage Blow setup. After initiating, Rhajat will deal 21 AoE damage, and since they can't counterattack back, this leaves some nice targets for teammates to finish off. If you want to make sure Rhajat survives, she can use this build with Wind or Water Sweep. She will need to outspeed her opponent, but she would get a free attack off and apply her AoE damage and dazzling status effect. If you want to run double Savage Blow with a bit more offensive pressure, then you could use it with the classic Fury and Desperation combo. Rhajat really needs any bonus defense and res, and her Tome still does inflict -5 speed and res, which means she can deal damage herself. The advantage of running Fury is that eventually Rhajat will dip into Wings of Mercy range, and that means allies can warp to her to clean up the weakened enemy team. If you want to use her with a Dancer, then Res Smoke is an okay option too, but double Savage Blow is nasty when you get multiple attacks off in one turn. I like using Jafar with his Deadly Dagger with multiple Dancers, so I imagine Rhajat can make a similar playstyle work since she has more attack than poor Jafar. Last, there is the Close Counter plus Vanish setup. Units like Jafar, Kronya, or Pain plus Healer can use this build to Vanish cheese multiple enemies since they lose so much HP due to Savage Blow's AoE. Not only does Rhajat have decent tech, but she deals magic damage, and she inflicts -5 res at all times, so that's a nice bonus for this playstyle. As long as she doesn't get one shot, she should be pretty annoying, and in general, having Vantage would be great to stop any low res cavaliers. While Rhajat may not be creating a new playstyle, she can apply her debuffs from range, which is nice. Kemp is going to be able to do some fun stuff with a Gale Force set, but Rhajat gets extra combative power to take out enemies herself. Personally, I think this is a pretty decent weapon and refine. Our third refine is for Sigurd's Divine Tyrfing. Seliph has a refine for his regular Tyrfing, but he can also get access to Divine Tyrfing for Divine Dew. It may honestly be worth it this time. So Divine Tyrfing keeps its old effect, but gets a nice buff. It's a 16-might sword that grants +3 res, and if the foe uses magic, aka tomes, then Sigurd reduces the damage of their first attack by 50%. This makes him unexpectedly tanky against a mage, and it combines with his unique Crusader's Ward B skill that basically reduces damage from ranged attacks by 80% if it's the second attack and onward. The new effect added to base Divine Tyrfing is that if Sigurd starts combat with more than 50% HP, he gets +5 attack and defense. Really nice buff and very simple condition to activate. For the refined upgrade, there was a mistranslation, at least that's what it seems like from testing. It originally states that if the user's HP is over 50%, but it seems like it actually means if the foe's HP is above 50%, then Sigurd gets another +5 attack and defense, and he makes a guaranteed follow-up attack. This is actually a really good refine and buff to Divine Tyrfing. 10 extra attack and defense and a follow-up on top of the original effect is really strong. It gives so much offensive power to Sigurd or Seliph, and the extra defense keeps the physical attackers at bay while he still gets 50% less damage from a mage's first attack. With Divine Tyrfing, Sigurd would have 61 attack and 44 defense, which is kinda crazy, and the follow-up attack just opens up a lot more builds and playstyles. Seliph would also benefit from this refine as well, but we will focus on Sigurd mostly. First off, I actually think this refine does work with Crusader's Ward. Sigurd isn't going to be a tanky god like Brave Ike, but he's not an easy target to snipe off for a mage, and he has so much more offensive power now. I think he could continue to stack defense and let the % damage reduction keep him alive, but adding a little more res is not going to hurt. Attack Smoke is a great debuff here, and Sigurd can also use solo skills like Attack and Defense Solo or the Speed and Res Solo seal to round out his stats. The thing to keep in mind is that the Refine effect, which has the guaranteed follow-up effect, is based off the enemy's HP, so even if Sigurd gets hurt, he may still be able to burst down a target. We can take advantage of this with a full-on attack stacking setup. While Sigurd has some decent speed, I wouldn't call him the most offensive cavalier ever. That's going to change when the guy gets +10 attack and a free follow-up that is incredibly easy to activate. You could just run double death blow skills and low attack and defense, and Sigurd suddenly becomes a great offensive sword cavalier. His player phase gets a huge buff, and it's not like the follow-up goes away on the enemy phase either. I would say Sigurd now is almost like a much easier to execute version of Harid. He just needs to fight a healthy enemy versus requiring debuff support. Now, there are certainly a lot more builds to discuss because this refine is really cool, but here are a few I want to highlight. Because the follow-up is tied to enemy HP, Sigurd can run Desperation, and he could get 2 attacks in a row. That could replace low attack and defense, as nice as that skill is. As mentioned, you can boost Sigurd's speed or res stats, and the speed and res solo Sacred Seal shines once again. If you want to play more defensive, that is totally fine because the refine works on both phases. You could go for a tier 3 dual stance for guard, or in a big brain kind of build, you could use distant foil. Sigurd has the same issue as Brave Ike before running distant counter because it messes up Crusader's Ward and Divine Divine Tyrfing's interaction. If you only counter bows and dagger units, that's fine because Sigurd gets +10 defense from his sword and then another +5 defense from distant foil. You could still run Crusader's Ward to reduce a mage's first hit by 50% and then their second hit gets reduced by 80%. Because of the free follow-up and +10 attack, Sigurd still has kill potential, which is why I really like this refine. That leads to the last setup, which is that this refine could make Sigurd a decent Gale Force Cavalier. Free follow-up attack plus 10 extra attack is exactly what you want for Heavy Blade and Gale Force. Heavy Blade plus Bonfire would also be just as scary. Overall, this new Divine Tyrfing opened up so many builds for Sigurd. He can keep his niche of surviving mages, but now he has a lot more damage output. Very happy for him. Now, Seliph also wins out here too, in my opinion. It's expensive to grab Divine Tyrfing, but man, it's a really good option. His original Tyrfing has that very unique miracle ability which can be fun for PvP modes, but Divine Tyrfing gives a ton of attack and defense, 50% damage on mage attacks, and a follow-up for both phases. Seliph gets the same flexibility as his dad since not needing quick repulse opens up that B slot, and he can actually have a decent player phase as well. He can even replicate Crusader's Ward by using deflect magic. As an infantry unit, Seliph has even more skills to choose from. He could use Wrath, Special Spiral for cooldown reduction, or even Sudden Panic to support his teammates. He can use impact skills to have better initiations, or he can use Steady Breath to spam out specials. I even saw someone mention using Time's Pulse if you wanted Seliph to run the Gale Force plus Heavy Blade combo. Now, I don't know if you will see Seliph or Sigurd pop up in your PvP matches, but for PvE content, they should be a lot more fun to use now. Last up is our two ploy boys, Arvis and Saias. These two have identical unique tomes, and their stats are also very similar. Arvis is a red mage while Saias is a blue mage, and Arvis does have his unique Recover Ring B skill. Since these two got the same weapon and refine, we'll be covering both of them, and pretty much everything from builds to playstyles can transfer between the two. For Arvis's Valflame and Saias' Wargod's Tome, these both got buffs to their base effect. Before, they had an attack and res ploy type ability, but now they no longer have any res check, and their range covers 3 columns or 3 rows centered on them. If any enemy is in that giant area, they get a -5 attack and res debuff. So there is once again a slight mistranslation here. In game it says 3 columns and 3 rows, which could imply a 3x3 box similar to Milla's weapon. However, you can test it in game. The debuff works all the way across the map. This is a huge buff for both units since they get a bigger range and will always apply their debuffs to all enemies in the area. To make things even better, Valflame and Wargod's Tome both get the Blizzard/Broadleaf Fan type ability, grants bonus to units attack equal to total penalties on foe during combat. So if Arvis or Saias lands their debuffs, that's already an extra +10 attack. These guys aren't exactly hyper offensive mages, so the extra damage is appreciated, and they can opt to build more supportive if you want. While you could give Arvis and Saias all 4 ploy debuffs, they obviously couldn't make use of the defense debuffs to their advantage. Thanks to this refine though, even defense debuffs just add extra damage, and these two will join the ever-growing team of debuff focused units like Gunther or Matthew. So in terms of usefulness, I would say both Arvis and Saias are going to be really good for any unit that has an effect that requires a penalty on the enemy. For example, Thrasir is extremely good when she procs her B skill, but she needs a penalty on the foe to do so. Arvis and Saias can apply long range debuffs with no stat comparisons, so they are great allies to enable Thrasir. I wouldn't be surprised to see them in Aether Raids because their debuffs will stretch down the whole map, although you do need to be careful of things like Fallen Ike or the Unity A skills. For builds, the general game plan for both Arvis and Saias isn't going to drastically change. Now they get an easier way to debuff enemies, and if you want, you could still go the 4 debuff route by taking speed ploy and defense ploy. You will need to line them up, but if you were already doing it beforehand, then you should be okay. For Arvis, his Recover Ring restores 10 HP every turn, so he can still run Fury okay. If you aren't planning to fight too often, Fury is nice for the flat res boost and just overall stat boost since neither mage is really fast. Because the refine ability can add a good amount of extra attack, you could try for a one-shot build. You would need to keep stacking debuffs, but you can also pile on attack boosting skills like Sturdy Impact or Death Blow. For survivability, something like Sturdy Impact with the new attack and defense solo Sacred Seal would be nice for Arvis and Saias. You could run a low res skill to stack with the attack and res debuffs from Valflame and Wargod's Tome. Again, this would probably be best if you have a whole team composition focused on debuffing. There's nothing wrong with investing in extra speed either, but the weapons don't apply speed debuffs, so that's something you're going to need to provide for yourself. Now, while you can build for more attack and speed, you could just also go for a more support oriented role. While ploys are fine debuffs, we also have Sabotage and Chill skills. I think bringing Chill Speed or Chill Defense is great because that's a big -7 debuff, which means +7 extra attack. If you're stacking res still, these Sabotage skills can cover grouped up enemies not in the massive range of their weapons. If you don't want to complicate things, you could run self-buffing or regular buffing skills. For example, Arvis and Saias can run a Link B skill to buff their own stats and an ally stats when they debuff from the backlines. You can run any Rally Assist skill or a C skill like Joint Hold Attack or Attack Tactic. A Ruse B skill could work, but you're probably going to want to get Speed and Defense Ruse since the weapons are already covering attack and res. Speed and Defense Ruse only exist on Eleonora, so not exactly an easy skill to get, but the option is there. Overall, Valflame and Wargod's Tome are going to be really nice if you just need any kind of debuff. Certain units only need any kind of penalty to activate their weapons, and of course, there are quite a number of units with this debuff Blade Tome type ability. Adding Arvis or Saias to a team of debuffers would be great for general effectiveness. Those are our finds for October. What do you think about these new weapons, and are you planning to use any of them? For me, I already grabbed Sigurd and Arvis's refines because I think they're neat to have on hand. Maybe I would try out Rhajat's new Tome because I don't use her at all currently. She's kind of just collecting dust. That's all I got for now. I'll be back to talk about the Halloween banner and the Tempest Trials event, so I'll see you guys soon.